For my in-school literacy event, I observed Mrs. Sheets' second grade classroom at Hillsborough Elementary School during their Daily 5 literacy activity. During the Daily 5, students complete from 3 to 5 daily activities. The 4 activities that I observed were read to self, listen to reading, read to buddy, and respond to reading. Text used in read to self and read to buddy are books sorted into bins according to each child's reading level. Students at similar reading levels have the same bins. The students access text by choosing books from their bins on the bookshelf. The students are in control of the text and they hold them. During listen to reading, students log on to a computer program and text is read to them from the computer screen. Students can read along as they are listening to the text. After students finish read to self, they log the book that they read and the level of the book that they read within their yellow journals. The students are in control of this text in that they record the book, title, genre, date, and level. Key vocabulary that the children use to describe their books are 2 easy books that are fun to read, as well as challenging books which are very difficult that they have trouble reading, and just right books that they can understand well and that they can enjoy. In responding to reading, students have the option of responding to the read aloud that the teacher has done during Reader's Workshop, or they can respond to individual books that they are reading themselves. During Respond to Reading, the students copy down the questions the teacher writes on the easel on a blank piece of lined paper. They access the text by getting out their yellow folders and copying down the questions. In this exercise, they have to answer questions that she has constructed. The students get to hold the text because they have to write down their own responses. During Listen to Reading, the students access the text by going to tumblebooks.org to listen to reading. They listen to the text being read on the computer screen. They are able to follow along as the text is being read. In order to code break during Read to Self, students sound out the words and look at the pictures. In the classroom, the teacher has a poster that says 3 ways to read a book. 1. Read the words. 2. Read the pictures. 3. Retell the story. Students can use these techniques to code break. During Read to Buddy, they code break using the same tools, but they also have their buddy as a resource for help in sounding out the word and looking for context clues. For Listen to Reading, students are listening to reading on the computer. Therefore, if students are following along and don't know what a word says, they can listen to the computer and code break by matching the sound to the word. During Respond to Reading, if students do not understand directions, they raise their hands and ask the teacher, or they are encouraged to ask their neighbors at their desk. Students are fluent in this literacy community by being able to read and code break by sounding out words and looking for context clues. Students must also be able to read to buddies and run the program Tumblebooks on the computer for Listen to Reading. For Respond to Reading, students must practice comprehending what they hear during read aloud and comprehend the books they read to themselves. They must be able to read instructions and write their answers on the worksheets. During Read to Self, you comprehend by reading your book. During Read to Buddy, you comprehend by listening to your partner read to you, and you read to your partner. If you get stuck on a word, your partner knows you haven't comprehended and can help you. During Read Alouds, though, the teacher knows you haven't comprehended the story if you do not know the answers to the worksheets completed during Respond to Reading. If you get incorrect answers, your teacher tells you that you have not comprehended the reading. Being fluent means being able to participate in the activity and show evidence that you've comprehended through reading to buddies and responding to reading. A student must know how to read and write in order to keep practicing and comprehend. They must speak, read, and write in English. They must know how to do all of these things in order to be a successful literacy learner. The teacher should give a tutorial on how to use tumblebooks.org for Listen to Reading. The teacher should also give a lesson in responding and comprehending reading sometime during Reading Workshop, which is a different literacy event, so that students may successfully participate and respond to reading. Throughout the classroom, the teacher has listed on the wall the reasons why the students participate in each of these literacy practices. For Read to Self, we see that the motivation is that reading helps you learn words, it helps you focus, and it helps you learn about new things. This motivates students to read to themselves. For Buddy Read, it shows that they have more experience reading out loud, other people see your books, and if it's just right, and your partner can learn new words too. For Listen to Reading, you can hear correct pronunciation of words, hear how fluent readers read, and use listening skills, as well as reading skills, in order to complete this literacy activity. In responding to reading, students have practice in retelling, making predictions, and asking questions. Students show to others that they participate in the Daily 5 by asking questions about the assignment, by discussing their individual books with each other. Students talk about sounding out words and using context clues like pictures to figure out what a word is and what it means.
For my out-of-school literacy event, I participated in a fantasy football league and managed a team in the league by asking questions and observing others who participate in fantasy football. Here we can see the league that I've joined and my team name, Team Moser. The texts in fantasy football include the web pages for your league and each individual team within the league. You can read information about each team's standings. These standings are determined by the amount of wins and losses each team has. On your team's page, participants read player names, statuses including injury reports and starting lineups, and live scoreboards kept up to date during games. This is the scoreboard that is kept up to date. Here you can compare your performance to other teams' performances. The only text that is written in fantasy football is your matchup smackboard. These smackboards facilitate conversations between team members who are competing that week.
The text in fantasy football is dependent upon real players' performances and game results. You are in control of who is included in your fantasy team, but what actually happens during the games determines how well your fantasy team performs. All of this information is stored on the internet under your league.
The text in this literacy event is accessible if you are invited by the league manager to create your own team. When you accept the invitation, you create a username and password that gives you access to your league and your team when you log in at games.espn.go.com. In order to code break on this site, much of the text are links that can be clicked, so you can use context clues to figure out what the text means. For example, if I don't know what the word trend counter means, I can click on it, and it redirects me to another web page. Here I can see it's titled Transaction Counter, with each of the team members' names on here, or with each team owner's name on here. Here I can see how many players they've traded, acquired, dropped, and activated throughout our time on fantasy football together. Key vocabulary in this literacy community includes league and team. The league is the combination of all the teams in your league, with each team being managed by a different participant. The league that I participated in consists of 14 teams. The weekly matchup is the weekly game you play against another team in your league. In deciding what players you want to play that week, a key vocabulary term that you need to know is projected points, which tells you about how many points a player is expected to contribute to your fantasy team that week. This information helps you in getting the maximum amount of points for your team. Opponent ranking is also very important. This ranking tells you how well the other team is that your player is playing. The higher the ranking of the opponent, the better the opposing team is and the riskier it is to play that player. Other key vocabulary is standings. Standings ranks the team within your league based on wins and losses. And the league scoreboard keeps you up to date on every matchup within your league and the points they get throughout the games. A person is fluent in this literacy community by keeping up to date throughout the weekend players' performances so they can decide who they want to play during the next week. A person is fluent when he or she can manage their team by moving players from starting to the bench and vice versa in order to maximize the amount of points that they get for their team during that week's matchup. You comprehend in fantasy football by staying up to date on the statuses of your starting and bench players so that you can arrange to have the best players on your team before the actual game begins on Sundays. Here we can see more key vocabulary. This gives us breaking news updates for each player. Here we see key vocabulary Q, which stands for questionable. Here we see that by clicking on that breaking news, I could figure out what Q stands for by seeing that it says that the player remains questionable. Through using context clues, I've seen that P stands for probable, which means they're probably playing, and O stands for out, which means that they're definitely not going to play in that week's game. Another webpage that is very helpful in doing fantasy football is the Launch Fantasy Cast page. Here we can see live scoring of each game. People know you haven't comprehended fantasy football if many of your starting players are injured or on bye, because then it is clear you haven't logged into your team and set up your players. Here we can see that this opponent has 2 empty slots. This shows that she did not log on in order to maximize the amount of points she was going to get for her team that week. In fantasy football, being fluent means understanding how to maneuver your players into positions on your team so that you can have the optimum amount of points during a matchup with another fantasy team in your league. Being fluent also includes watching the games and judging for yourself how well your players perform and play them accordingly, without solely relying on the expected amount of points they are supposed to get. Skills necessary to be successful include being able to navigate the fantasy football website. You must be skillful in reading the links and finding your own team's page in order to rearrange your players. You must also be able to read projected points and opponent rankings so that you can be successful in having the best players on your starting lineup. That is other vocabulary that is useful. You must understand that starters mean that those are the players that are going to be active and the ones that are contributing points for you. Your bench are team members that are not actually contributing to your team's score. However, you can still stay up to date on how many points they are getting by going to your team's page throughout the day on Sunday. The amount of prior knowledge is minimal to participate in fantasy football. It makes it easier if you understand the different positions in football for your fantasy team. But the website labels each player's position for you, so that I can't accidentally put a running back in my quarterback's position. It is also helpful to have knowledge of the players before you add them to your team. However, ESPN pre-ranks them so you can get by without any prior knowledge of their past performances, and by keeping up to date on their projected points, you can see how they're doing compared to other players. In order to be a successful literacy learner, you must know how to navigate the fantasy football website. That comes through practice and trial and error. Your league's other team owners are also available for you to ask questions.
These practices should be taught by other participants in fantasy football, whether they are in your league or not. A person could always learn from trial and error, but it may be best to observe others when they are setting up their own teams so that you will know how to manage yours.
You show others that you participate in fantasy football by talking about players' performances and describing who your starting lineup is. Participants are motivated to learn how to manage their teams because they want to perform well during their weekly matchups, and how many points players contributed that week during your matchup.